Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The lecture is about to begin. Please switch your mobile phone to silent. Welcome to the Professor Dame Jessica Rawson Chinese Art History Lecture Series 2026, jointly organized by the Department of Fine Arts and the Institute of Chinese Studies, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Today, we commence the third lecture, The Dancing Horses of the Tang Dynasty and Their Predecessors. May we invite Professor Lai Chi-Tim, Executive Associate Director of Institute of Chinese Studies, to be the moderator of this lecture. Professor Lai, please.
Dear Professor Rawson, and also honorable guests, colleagues, and also all friends, I think this is a very special big gathering at the Institute of Chinese Studies. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the third lecture of the Chinese Art History Lecture Series delivered by Professor Rawson, our distinguished visiting professor, invited by the Department of Fine Arts and also the Institute of Chinese Studies, with the support of the北山堂Foundation. And this afternoon's lecture titles, The Dancing Horses of the Tang Dynasty and Their Predecessors. I think this is a very meaningful and timely topics for us to welcome the new lunar years of the year of the horse. Yeah, thank you so much. And before I invite Professor Rawson to start her lectures, let me give you some brief introductions of Professor Rawson's academic achievements in the past decades. Professor Rawson is Professor of Chinese Art and Archaeology at the University of Oxford. She worked for over 20 years at the British Museum and was responsible for the renovation of the famous Sir Joseph Horton Gallery of Oriental Antiquities. In 1994, she moved to Oxford, where she became warden of Merton College and later Vice-Chancellor of the University of Oxford, making significant contributions to establishing the Oxford China Center. Also in 2017, Professor Rawson was awarded the Charles Long Field Medal by the Field Gallery of the Smithsonian Institution for her lifetime contribution to the study of Chinese art and archaeology. And recently, in 2022, Professor Rawson was also the recipient of the prestigious Tang Prize in Sinology awarded by the Academia Sinica in Taiwan. And among Professor Rawson's publications, I think we all know of her very important and also very valuable reference on Chinese ornament, the lotus, and also dragon, published in 1984, and also a Chinese jade from the Neolithics to the Qing 1995, and the most recent one, as all of you have some glimpse of the new publications, Life and Afterlife in Ancient China, published in 2023. So thank you. Please.
I'm so happy to be back here to talk to all of you in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. It's a fantastic university, wonderful academia, and also a beautiful site. And it's been a very happy time for me. Thank you very much indeed also to the北山堂Foundation for supporting this lecture and the whole series that I've enjoyed here in Hong Kong. I've come here very rarely, and the last time I came in 2011, I also talked about horses, but this is somewhat different. I'm going to look at horses in a slightly different light, and also talk about them partly in the kind of mythological and fantastic way they're described, and partly to show my interest in them as a major feature of China's international relations from about the 1500 BC down to the 19th century. And I chose the term dancing horses on purpose. The first time I thought about horses in China, it was the dancing horses that came to my mind because they appear in Tang poetry and I was very intrigued by them. But you see on this slide, first a dancing horse on the silver flask, but more importantly, the heavenly horse that rides over the mountains among the clouds. And I shall end there when I reach my end, because I think for the Chinese, the horses always have this slightly mystical and mythical character. The horses, of course, known as dancing horses, are the horses of the Emperor Xuanzong, and he was from the 5th day of the 8th lunar month in 729 that it was decreed that this would be a special day for the 1000 autumn holiday for everyone, and 100 dancing horses would perform. They were beautifully dressed, elaborately engilded and jeweled manes and halters. Indeed, again, they looked almost mythical. But of course, they were part of a long history. This is not the first set of dancing horses. It's the third set, perhaps. And before them were the idea that there were heavenly horses to be found in Uzbekistan, what we would call Uzbekistan, in the Fergana Valley. So the horses carried, even in the Tang Dynasty, this very alluring, perhaps special sign of heavenly connections, and they were sometimes called dragon mediators. So there's a little fragment of a piece of poetry below the horses just to show you the kind of thing that was written about them. The music of the time owed a lot to the steppe, to the people who came from Central Asia in particular, and this is a very good picture of them. On the left is a tomb of Xu Xianxu of the 6th century at Taiyuan, and they're playing musical instruments, and exactly the same instruments must have been known at the Tang court because they're in the Shosuin, in the treasury at Nara. So that treasury was bestowed by the widow of the emperor of Japan and have been kept ever since in a special treasury in Nara, where they're shown once a year in November. And they appear again on this camel with a people from the West, from the Central Asians, with their beards, their peaked caps, they're playing these instruments. So the music in itself was not invented in China. It was played in China and further elaborated, but it came from further west. And it is indeed this picture that I found most alluring. This is a wall painting from Dunhuang, and I find that almost hard to believe, but Maggie has checked, and it is indeed from cave 290, and it shows a man from the group called the Tu Hun, who was training it to dance. And the Tu Hun, who came, as I hope you can see here, they're here on the edge of Xinjiang, on the edge of Qihai. They are living here at this time. They have a great herds of horses. They train them, and it's from them that the first gifts to the courts were made. First to the divided China into many courts, and later to the predecessors of the Tang Dynasty. So the dancing horse, though it was famed through the Tang Dynasty, is in fact horses trained in Central Asia. And so we are seeing here a fragment of the very important interactions between the Tang courts and their predecessors with their neighbors in Central Asia. And we should never overlook the gifts that are exchanged between the Chinese courts and their neighbors to the west. Their neighbors to the west, the Sogdians or the Turks, often played large roles in the Chinese court. Here, this is the scenes you see on a funerary couch of a man called Anjie, who died in 571. It's a very famous stone carving. And here you see the Sogdian. This is the Sogdian in his Sogdian hat. And here is the Turk with his long flowing hair, and they're drinking and greeting each other on horseback. And this is the scenes that are associated with the 6th and 7th century on the northern western edge of China. And here too is the dancing by men who are, of course, from Central Asia, wearing boots. So we're building here a picture of the dancing horses having their antecedents in the relationships between the courts of the Chinese rulers in central China and those in Central Asia. Incidentally, here is a tomb with the painting of the male inhabitant with his horse and his wife who has an ox cart, so that the importance of the northern Qi dynasty bringing the rulers from the north into China embedded this northern style of using horses and music in northern China in the 6th century. And it's in this context that we should look at what we call trade, though I'm now going to suggest that we should not really be talking about trade along the Silk Road. We should be talking about the gift economy, the building of relationships between the central Chinese court, sometimes divided into many, sometimes a single unified court of the Tang and later the Sung, but we're looking at exchanges that are initiated from Central Asia and valued highly by the Chinese courts. And I get this idea most recently from this book, The King's Road. I find this a very inspiring book. Are you having difficulty hearing me? Can you hear me better if I lower it? I'm not going to get nearer. I'm trying to get it more near me. Is that better? I know you always have trouble in hearing me. I don't know how to manage it. Anyway, now we get to the most important example that I have first in this first section, which is the use of gifts. This is an example of a text written at Dunhuang based on material from Dunhuang. And it's dated to 878. And what it talks about is a gift from the Lord of Dunhuang to a minor court in China, to the Tang Dynasty. And at the top, you see a list of the gifts to the officials from Dunhuang. And in all of this gifting series, silk plays a major part. And one reason is, of course, that above all, it was best woven in China. On the other hand, there were many other people weaving silk already in other parts of Central Asia. But the Lord of Dunhuang coveted the silk, and he had sent an envoy of 29 to the Tang court. So what we're seeing is a period of diplomatic exchange. For seen from my perspective and seen in the many discussions, people talk about the trade along the Silk Road. What we're seeing is what I would call a gifting economy. And the Lord of Dunhuang wants a recognized title in a banner from the Chinese court. He's not going to get it, but he gets a large amount of material. Dunhuang has sent 3 minor pieces to China. He sent an antelope horn, a yak tail, and a large piece of jade. These are Central Asian items. He gets in return 42 sets of cotton clothes, 1,848 p of silk, which amounts to 22,000 meters of silk, which would have had to be carried on 6 camels. That's why I showed you some camels. And as well as that, there are 19 items of silver. Now, some of it goes directly to the Lord of Dunhuang, but some of it goes to the envoys. And the envoys get silk in order that they can be able to buy camels and horses for future trips. They may, of course, been able to do trading on the side, but what we're looking at is a very important feature of China, which we in the West failed completely to recognize. Instead of thinking of tribute, you should think that this is a gifting economy where the Chinese are giving larger gifts than those that they received. And they did that in order to keep the relationship going strongly. China always did and does believe in relationships, and the gift economy is that which made it work. An essential part of that gift economy was always horses. So you see a picture on this slide of a camel and a horse, and later we'll give some more statistics. But this is something that the Western Europeans have in the past and today completely overlooked, and I think it's an essential part of this medieval period of China. This is the kind of document you would have seen from which this information comes, and at the top is something written in Cantonese, and at the bottom written in Chinese. And they are contracts, records of sales, there are also itineraries, there are lists of points to stop off on the way to and from China, and the distance from Kaifeng in the Song period to Khotan to Hetian was further than from Hetian to the Black Sea. So this is an enormous stretch of rules or routes which are followed by these large delegations to the Chinese court. I've recently been very happy to visit the textile exhibition in the Palace Museum twice, and here you see the sort of textile which was probably woven actually in Central Asia, but probably using Chinese silk, so that the confronted horses and the horses with wings are themes that come from Sasanian Iran or from Byzantium. They are very Mediterranean in their form, but they are used all the way across Central Asia. Here is a slide that gives you some information on the degree of exchange of horses and silk. The horses were essential for warfare, particularly for attacking and sending back the horse riders of Mongolia. And the Turks were major providers of the horses, and they sent 50,000 horses to the Western Way. So it's not a small deal. We're dealing with horse numbers of extraordinary size. Sometimes we're talking about 1 or 2 horses bred by a trader, but often they are groups of peoples in Central Asia who want to and have to trade with the Tang and later the Song. So in 640, the Tang military subsidy injected lots of silk into Xinjiang before the Anlushan rebellion. And the Anlushan rebellion, which after all ends the reign of the Emperor Xuanzong, the Xuanzong we mentioned, is of course the turning point which overturns the domination of the Tang. Thereafter, there are divided small states in Central Asia and in parts of China. But the Tang continued to send in 730 to 40, 900,000 bolts of silk. I mean, this is an extraordinary number, and they continue to seek horses, and the same goes for later in the Tang Dynasty. So that the silk and the horses are constantly exchanged. And this is not, therefore, a trade so much as an organized system where the Tang is maintaining military stations in Central Asia, and the Central Asian powers are seeking the good humor, the support, and the, if you like, the status that the Chinese will offer. Now I will go back to explaining what is the back of all this, or the foundation. At my talk in the Palace Museum, I mentioned this map several times. And I mentioned it because, of course, it divides this culture, which is rice and millet farming, from this one, which is wheat and barley. And they have completely different cultures, as I explained in my previous lecture. But as far as I can make out, not enough people think about the central area, which is very arid and dry. And this is the reason why animals are so important. It's so dry that in Tibet, growing millet and rice would be impossible. They grow barley. In the steppe area here, they could grow some millet, but not rice. And herding and hunting were essential. Now, to those of us who live in the West, that seems quite normal. But for the Chinese side, herding animals is not normal. And what I was showing you was a part of China which this border area is an area in which there was both herding and cropping. And that is a very important feature of China because it enabled this maintaining of relationships with Central Asia and the steppe. And while China could maintain those relationships, it remained safe from being invaded. When it did not maintain them, it was invaded and they took over this border area. So I think people often think the barbarians are a pain and a difficulty. In fact, they are the secret to China's power in many periods, and maintaining good relations with people in Central Asia or in the steppe is essential to ensure the protection of the central states. And that's why this arc area, the border area, is so important. And if you want to see what the dangers was, here they are. Here are the campaigns fought by the Tang Dynasty. They had to fight campaigns against a vast number of people. Here are my friends, the Tu Yuhun, who bring the best horses for dancing into China. There are campaigns here, all around the north, as far as Korea, and even some in the far south. So this is the state of international affairs in the Tang Dynasty, and they work on it and maintain a good border because they actually occupy this northern area. And we know what went wrong. It was that northern area which went over to Anlushan, caused the upheaval of the Tang Dynasty, and that was due to not being able to control that area. Controlling that area was essential. And just to give you another snapshot of what this area looks like, here are the numbers of campaigns or total attacks in the early Tang, 117. That is, in each year, at least nearly one. So this is a very important aspect of China, and it's the reason why both they maintained good relationships internationally with their neighbors and why they exchanged the silk for horses. So this is a constant dialogue and of great importance to China's history. The Tang Dynasty are also often cited as a cosmopolitan dynasty. I would say they were very astute. They knew the people of the borders, they knew the Turks very well, and it's their astuteness that kept this complicated relationship under control. And it was a very important relationship. In fact, it was so important that Tang Taizong had the horses he rode and valued carved into slabs of stone at his tomb, which is shown here. At the tomb of Tang Taizong is in a minor mountain, if you like, a great hill north of Xi'an. And here is another. This is another of his horses, and it is thought that actually he may have heard about this kind of carving in the mountains in Iran. And here is the Sasanian ruler capturing the Roman emperor. So that is, if you like, the foretaste. That's the part of Chinese history that we need to remember as a great triumph of the medieval period. I'm now going to look at what is the foundation of the problem with horses. Why do they need to maintain good relations with people in Central Asia and the steppe? And I'll show you several aspects of the difficulties of raising horses in main China. And one of them is just agriculture. China developed a very high level of agriculture long before they met the horses. The horses were only moving towards China around 2000 BC. The domestication of rice and millet took place in 6000 or 5000 BC and was in full steam long before the horses came. And one thing they wanted to do, the peasants wanted and the owners of the land wanted to make sure is to keep the horses out. Horses need to roam, then it's no good letting them be penned in narrow pens. They have to roam for their health. And in fact, they were never kept on the North Central Plain in free roaming style, as they would be in Mongolia or Great Britain. Instead, they were kept on the hills beyond the Central Plain. And there are very good reasons why people moved into the Central Plain, and that is the temperature. As well as being arid, the areas of Mongolia, for instance, Ulaanbaatar, has -30 as the average temperature for the winter. If you move to Hui Hot, it's slightly better, -20. If you go to Yulin, better still, and Xi'an, even better. So there's a strong imperative to move towards the agricultural area. But there's a strong imperative from the owners of the agricultural area to push everybody back. So this is how the dialogue about the horses begins. I'm also going to show you something that is a bit of a conundrum, a bit of a question. It would appear that the nutritions in certain parts of China are inadequate. And it's this belt, this pale belt, that is thought to be very poor in a mineral, a minor mineral called selenium. And without it, horses suffer greatly, but we do too. And if you look at where that belt is, it falls on the boundary between the Pacific monsoon fading and the Arctic winter arriving. So this area sometimes has a lot of water and sometimes has completely inadequate water. And it has a lot of erosion, and therefore the selenium and other nutrients are washed away. So there's something odd about this area, and it certainly not only affects horses, but people. And if you look back here at the modern distribution of horses, you find this area is rather short on horses today. So there's definitely a horse problem in the borders where the horses are entering China. At the moment they enter, they meet a very inauspicious part of China. So that's certainly one reason that horses are a problem, and new horses have to be reintroduced to China every few decades. And this is the area which shows you where humans suffer from some nutrition deficiencies. So this is a piece of work done by people interested in human conditions, and they show that it is not a very suitable area for humans. And this map down here shows the green belt, and this is the green belt is where what I would call the arc, where people from the north and the west meet the Chinese from the agricultural plain. So this is the agricultural plain. And now the horse heads and the burials tell you that people living here included the horse owners. So it's an important aspect of this region that it's a place for meeting for horse owners and farmers. And last week I spoke about the Loess, and here the area which I'm describing suffers because it's in the Loess area, and that is very easily eroded, and eroded by bad farm management over long periods. So that the Loess too plays a role in why China is vulnerable to people arriving from the steppe. And so once more I show you this, and now I'm going to show you the steppe. So this is the area where horses have flourished and where they enter China, and we will look at them entering China over this boundary. So this is Mongolia, real Mongolia, not inner Mongolia. And there you find this kind of burial, which is marked in stone on the steppe. And you see there are no trees, no millet, no cabbages, nothing. In this area, there's not enough everyday food of the kind we are familiar with here in China. And this is a plan, and all these circles represent ritual deposits of horse heads. So where horse heads are buried, you're dealing with groups of people who are riding horses, valuing horses, and making ritual offerings with horses in mind. This is not what you find in central China. And here is another of these important ritual centers which has deer stones, and the deer stones carry belts. Belts are a sign of outsiders entering China. If you find belts, then they're not local Chinese. This is a sign of foreigners, and foreigners need belts because they carry weapons. And so we're looking at a weapon area in Mongolia. And here, the way into China, this is the arc again, the way into China is down the rivers. So the first arrival in China of horses is with the chariot. And this is in the Shang period, around 1250 BC. And the chariot starts out from here in western steppe area, and it goes west into Europe and east across the steppe to China. And we can see it traveling from the petroglyphs. These are carvings in rocks across the steppe area which show horses and chariots. So we know that this is the way they came. And here we see them in China, not buried as horse heads. They're buried as a whole, with a whole chariot, either as 2 horses or 4 horses. The 4 horses are slightly later. So the first phase of relationships with China is to provide chariots to fight and to help push back the people from Mongolia. So we're already in war. The horse is a weapon of war, but it's also a weapon of war in the afterlife. So the burial of chariots is obviously intended for people in the afterlife. And if we move to the next phase, we find lots of China's now divided into many states in the 5th and 3rd century BC. And here we find many more horses. At this stage, China has been, if you like, colonized or semi-colonized by people who ride and who drive hard bargains. And recently I visited this. This is a site in Linzi in Shandong province where 600 horses are buried. And this is a quite unique example and shows that this area had very good contact with people with horses. And also they have a central tomb. This is the horses lie here, and the central tomb surrounded by stones, and stones undoubtedly indicate contact with the steppe. I show at the same time a piece of gilded horse tack, which shows a kind of, if you like, again, a mythical horse with a double horn emerging from the top of its head. So that at all stages, China turns these horses into something unique and strange and also mythical. And here, I'm going to show 2 examples where we clearly have members of the north from either Central Asia or more likely from Mongolia living in China. They have buried horse heads. So the big division between Chinese and outsiders is, though the Chinese bury whole chariots and whole horses, the outsiders bury horse heads. So that then we know these are people who are used to ritual offerings of the heads of their horse. This is one of those examples, and here is another with the animal heads, gold rings, that's a foreign idea, stone, which is a foreign idea, and a little cauldron, again, a northern idea. Recently, colleagues in the horsepower group at Oxford and Germany and France have put together some maps of present-day distribution of horses. And here you see that the horses are in the north. They're across the north in Central Asia and in Mongolia. And a group are found in Chengdu in the Sichuan Basin. But otherwise, a lot of China is without its horses, or the odd one, a few horses. And then, surprisingly, there are a lot of horses in Central Africa. What has happened? What has happened is the people in Mongolia and South Siberia have become extraordinarily powerful and wealthy. And this is Arjan II. This is the couple I showed you in the last talk wearing belts. The belts show that they are riders, and they wear a tunic. We'll look at tunics, but if you want to see that kind of dress, you will see it immediately in the Palace Museum, where the 2 dresses of riders are displayed. They have a tight top, tight arms, very neatly belted, and a tunic which ends above the knees because they're riding. And they show examples of Song and of Jin and Yuan, wonderful dress, and is certainly relevant to this man. He's got a tunic and she has got a riding tunic above her skirt. Whether that's correct, I would expect her to wear leggings and have a riding tunic. And this is a very powerful group of people who spread from the Altai, that is in South Siberia, all the way to the Mediterranean. So the people who are thinking that the Mediterranean brings to light this group of people, it isn't. These are Far Easterners from South Siberia. And here you see them spread across the map. They all have swords. The swords are all decorated in gold. They all wear clothes decorated in gold animals. And this kind of interest in iron weapons with gold decoration spreads into China. This is from North China, and this is from the border of China, a spearhead, and here a dagger. Shows the power of this group of people who take over and impact very strongly the period of the Warring States. And also you can see that they have this kind of tiger with horns attacking a horse. This is from the collection of Peter the Great from Siberia. But here into this is the Peter the Great, and this is from Zhongshan, from a small state in northern China, in Hebei, south of Beijing, and is a tiger carrying an ibex in its jaw. So that in this case, it's not a dialogue so much as a pressure. It's like the pressure coming in and pressing on the central Chinese, bringing in people who are bringing Western or steppe ideas. And we see here one from Ma Jiayuan, and Raphael Wong from Hong Kong has wrote his thesis about this in Oxford. This is a very important tomb where they had amazing chariots, but all decorated in gold and silver and tin. And the man, of course, wears belts and has weapons. And others have mapped the way in which these decorated belts come east to China and go west to the Black Sea. And one of the most important features of this impact is on the first emperor, the Qin state. The Qin state is pushed into action by these people who are moving with horses into Western China. And we see first the horses in the burial kurgan in Kazakhstan. So this group of people with their horses, they are buried with the horses alongside the coffin. And this is a very important sign of a steppe culture of great success in eastern Kazakhstan, so on the edge of China in the Altai. Now, in the eastern edge of the Altai, on the western edge of the Altai, north of the Chinese. And here is the horse of the first emperor. He's a cavalry horse out of the terracotta warriors, and his saddle, the saddle of this creature, is undoubtedly the saddle borrowed from Kazakhstan. It's later than Kazakhstan, and it has exactly the same straps and the same stranging heads, the hanging threads, and the same loop behind the tail. So we're looking at a form of riding that has come from Kazakhstan to the Qin state. And the horse also has S-shaped cheek pieces. As you all know, I think cheek pieces are very instructive, and this is an entirely new form of cheek piece, which is found in Central Asia and travels east to the first emperor. And you can also compare the horse from the chariot of the first emperor with that of in Iran. So there's a horse culture that is shared between Iran, Kazakhstan, and Western China. And also the horse on this small chariot or carriage of the first emperor appears to be almost identical with that of the Sakas who are carved on this large monument, the Apadana, in Iran at the Persepolis. So we're looking at an exchange that is very strongly made the whole width of the steppe and Central Asia, and has a large impact on Western China. Here is that little chariot, and now I'm going to turn you back to looking here at the feet of the people who ride horses. Here is the terracotta warrior, the kind of cavalryman who would stand next to the horse in the terracotta warrior pits. And he is exactly like I described already. He's wearing a tunic, a short tunic, well above his knees, has a tight belt, and he has loose trousers. And those are essential features for riding. And if you look at his shoes, you will see that they're sewn. They're made of leather and they're sewn. And if you look here at the tomb of the Golden Man of Izhik, he's in Kazakhstan, he's earlier in date than the first emperor's cavalry. He has all the same features, a tunic, a tight belt, boots, and he has soft leather shoes. You cannot ride horses in hard shoes. And here is the Oxus treasure. This is in the British Museum, exactly the same. A man wearing a tunic, trying hard to avoid that, and he too has soft shoes. And later, the Parthian warrior, later than the first emperor, he too has soft shoes. So we're looking at a universal form of dress for riding across the whole of Eurasia, and it goes from Western China all the way to the Mediterranean. And you can look at it in more detail in this slide. So here you see the terracotta warrior with his soft shoes and its sewn leather. This is a detail from a golden bowl, and here the man is having a wound repaired, and there's a pair of soft boots there. This man is on one of the famous Peter the Great horse harnesses, and he too has soft shoes, so that they contrast with this. These are the shoes of a military official of the terracotta warriors. It's very important to look at the shoes and to think what it means to ride. Riding requires soft shoes. So if you like, here I end the second part of my talk saying that this is a time when the people in the steppe put great pressure on the Chinese side, and the Chinese, by unifying with a Western power, unifying China, are about to push back, so that the Chinese have on their side the very elaborate financial and government organization that enables them to act as if you like, to keep the state unified, and now to think about how to deal with these areas, because China is always going to have to deal with these Western areas. It still has to deal with them. So this is the Han Empire. And the Han Empire does in fact achieve a very large unified area, and they are the descendants of the first emperor. The first emperor has set up a very thorough government organization, and he has extended it southwards by sending migrants. He's taken convicts, he's taken ordinary people and pushed them south and kept good records of them. And these have been discovered recently in buried texts in southern wetlands. So we know that the Han achievements are based on those of the first emperor. And we know too that they were bothered by the horse owners. So they set out on efforts to push back, and they set up and maintain military depots in Central Asia. They go up the Hershey Corridor. This is the Hershey Corridor, as you all know, in Gansu province, and they spread out into the borders of the desert area. The center of this, of course, is a complete desert, but they set up posts along the oases round the desert, so that we have here a very strong attempt, and a successful one, by the Western Han to control the people who are coming at them from Central Asia. But as we saw from the Tang Dynasty, they have to reach agreements with these people, and this is not a period of, if you like, they have good criticisms of each other, but they reach agreements. And here is one of the big leaders of these attacks on the borders. These are the horses of Ho Chi Minh, who led forces westwards and northwestwards in 1117 BC. And we find very elegant bronzes, but also the first stone carvings of horses with lively eyes and all sorts of different stances. And they're all at the tomb of Ho Chi Minh. So this is very much recommended if you want to see the first sculptures of horses in China. The terracotta warriors are made of clay and intended for the afterlife. The horses are more of a memorial, especially the stone horses are found on the mound of the tomb. And this is a very new development. They're imitating people from Central Asia by creating stone monuments on their tombs. We also see in the Hershey corridor the development of these horse riders in a complete set of the kind of horses that would have been used or known to a local governor in the Hershey corridor, local governor of the Chinese side, running chariots, mounted horses, and a group of additional spare horses, if you like. This is the time of the Xiongnu, who are making a unified state in Mongolia, and the Chinese are responding by creating their own armies within China, mounted armies. So we've moved away from the separate states that led to the unification of China in due course to a unified empire. It is now going to break up again, but it's always going to come back to this unified state. There are also very engaging, wonderful images of riding and fighting on the walls of tombs in the Han period. So this is a time when horses are totally accepted within China and totally presented in paintings and in bronze and in stone and of course in ceramics. So there's a huge number of horse representations at this time. And then you have to think of China divided, and we have the time when China has smaller courts, but is still the grand leader to the people in Central Asia. And that leads us all back to the dancing horses and Xuanzong. So the last phase, if you like, of the Tang period ends with the dancing horses being dispersed as the emperor has to leave Xi'an. He is defeated by the rebellion of An Lushan, and it's his horses that are dispersed, lost, and killed. So that brings to the end this kind of dancing horse, but it does not bring to the end of the exchange that I mentioned is described in this book throughout the 10th century, where the horses are very important gifts from Central Asian powers to the Chinese forces, either to the smaller emperor and then to the Sung. But then we have to think about what I mentioned, that China has a very large border area at all periods during major unifications. So from the Hershey corridor through the whole Huangtu Gaoyuan, all to the northeast to the Liao area, that area is a border of interaction between the farmers and the people in the steppe and the desert. And it's that area that is less useful to the Chinese after the 10th century, because the Sung do indeed recover the organization of China. They do, in fact, create a very substantial and important court, a very important literature, a very important ritual reform. All sorts of important features of China are developed in the Song dynasty. And it is indeed a time of printing and publication and of scholarship. However, they have lost the north. The north, the very border area that I say is so important, has gone to the Liao dynasty first, and then to the Jin. And so the Song dynasty considers very hard how to deal with these steppe neighbors, but they do not have the benefit of what I would call the best form of interaction between different powers. The Tang Dynasty, its predecessors and its immediate successors had enormous benefits by developing a gifting economy with their neighbors. And the Song Dynasty is somewhat phased, if you like, by being faced by this group of people we'd call the Liao, and then we call the Jin, but are, of course, different groups of horse riders, different groups of nomadic peoples. And we can see them visible here. This is a famous court ritual in a scroll painting of the 11th to 12th century, now in the Palace Museum in Beijing. This is only a tiny bit, and I show you it because each section is in a different color. And it is the procession to the grand ancestor altar in the capital Kaifeng. And it took place once each season, and the painting displays the carriages and costumes, but the horses are tiny. And if you like, they have forgotten about the horses. The horses are not a major feature in this particular ritual. So we've looked at people, I've talked about people for whom horses were essential in the ritual, but here you can see what matters is the enormous abundance of color, of numerous costumes, and of great carriages. And though the horses pull the carriages, they are kind of forgotten. So in fact, the Song do not forget the North, they have to fight them. But I think in their daily life, in the way they present their rule, they do not present horses as a major feature. There are Song paintings with horses, but they're not a major feature in many paintings. They occur again, of course, with the Yuan. And the Yuan are, in my view, a very important group. Everybody writes books about them, they do exhibitions about them, but do we understand what they were like, and do we understand how they ran China? I think we should think more in terms of both a misfit. They were trying hard to work in a culture they didn't know, but they were pretty successful, and they were even more successful in Western Asia. So this is one of the great successes of the steppe people. And it's been very easy to play down the steppe people and the horse riders. But I think one should think about the success of the horse riders and the way in which China, if you like, digested that success. China, in fact, was very skillful at living with people who rode horses. And I'm going to talk in 1 minute about the contrasting situation in India. I hadn't realized till recently how important it was that the Yuan, as well as everybody else, had to rule China in Chinese with Chinese characters because they did not have their own writing. And it led time and time again to a strong dominance of the group of people who could write. And so China presented itself from the Shang dynasty, that is 1200 BC, in fact down to today, as dominating through a particular script which they controlled. And so the form of government, even under the Yuan dynasty, which is exceptionally successful, was carried out in Chinese. And that gives it an edge. And the reason why I think we should think about that is India. I hadn't realized until I read a few books over one Christmas that India is not in the same situation. The horses remain where they are. The horses are in the steppe area, in areas which are not highly cultivated. But you see here, coming south into and towards India, is a line of horses. These are horses today living and working in Afghanistan and coming down the Khyber Pass towards northern India, where in the northwest there's enough pasture to pasture horses. And undoubtedly, northern India was open to firstly people from Afghanistan and then people from Iran. And the people from Iran were exceptionally sophisticated. So in my last talk, I mentioned that Tibet stands in the way. If Tibet had not been there, and if the mountains had been crossable, then Iran might have had much bigger impact on China. But it did not have that big an impact. It had some impact. Iran remains a very important power in the past and today because it has a huge area it rules. But it could not send its troops directly to China. The people who sent the troops were the people from Mongolia and the people from Central Asia. And those are the people that China managed in different ways to cultivate. And I think we should remember the real skill of the Chinese in cultivating Central Asia and the steppe. And we have underestimated how important that was to their diplomatic skill, to their offering a kind of, if you like, achievement of a well-organized literate society that these minor domains, particularly in Central Asia, wished to use and borrow. So this book I've mentioned explains several times examples where the people in Central Asia sent deputations, sent envoys, sent diplomats to China to obtain, if you like, titles and banners to give them merit within the Chinese system. And I think this shows the extraordinary skill of China in dominating its part of Asia. Here I show you an Islamic example where, of course, the horses dominate India. So this is, and their own area brings in the dragons. The dragons come from China, of course, but they become evil in the Iranian context. And here you see the horse rider attacking them. So the horse rider is dominant in Iran, in Afghanistan, and in northern India. And they rule northern India in Persian from 800 AD to 1800 AD. And when the British took over bits of northern India, they governed in Persian. So I think one should really respect the achievements of the Iranians far more than we do, and expect to respect the contrast that China demonstrates. China achieves a completely different way of organizing their relationships with Central Asia and with the North than any other state. And finally, I end with a picture. Well, this isn't the last slide, but here I show you the last phase, which of course is the Qing dynasty. Now, the Ming dynasty is bedeviled by the horse problem again, and they have to import their horses to deal with the steppe. There are plenty of articles about it, and in the various articles that I've written, I've quoted them, and in the book. So you can check with Tim Brooke or with other students of his who talk about the difficulty of bringing in horses into China. The Manchus, of course, had no difficulty. They had a big source in their homelands, and the Jesuits persuaded Qianlong that he could look like a European monarch by riding a horse. So this is a Jesuit painting on behalf of Qianlong. And here is another important painting. There are many, many paintings of the Jesuit period showing horses. So the Qing dynasty certainly was interested in horses and certainly managed their own horse culture. I do, however, want to end with this picture because I think we overestimate the difficulty which the Chinese felt about the horses. They disliked the so-called barbarians, but they did actually admire the horse in a kind of secret way as a heavenly horse, as a horse miraculously fast that could gallop at the speed of a swallow. Here's the swallow below the hoof, that danced as on this flask, that was almost supernatural as on this very early horse tack for the forehead. And here in a precious piece of jade, very rare, there is a spirit riding on a horse. So I believe that one should also remember that for the Chinese themselves, in their own culture, they interpreted the horse as a mysterious and heavenly creature. So I will end with that. And this is the Western horse. So thank you very much.